Hey gang, Nath here from Headwear Games. Today I'd like to take a little bit of your time to talk about my new project, Hollowbody. This is the first in a series of devlogs about the game, and I hope you'll find it interesting. First, let me give you a little backstory about me and Headwear Games. I'm a solo developer from Bristol in the UK. I've previously shipped 2 commercial games where I've undertaken the majority of development tasks. I do programming, art, writing, sound design, all the good stuff. My first game was called Guard Duty. It's a LucasArts-inspired pixel art adventure game about saving the world. I released this game after a very long development cycle. It was my first game. I didn't really know what I was doing. Anyway, it did alright. It actually got ported to all modern consoles and even had a limited physical release on PlayStation Vita, of all things. After that, I started work on Chasing Static. Static's a 3D first-person psychological horror game, sort of a walking sim meets adventure game. It's a story about revisiting past trauma and uncovering a long-forgotten conspiracy. Chasing Static was released on PC in October last year to a really strong reception. I've had loads of lovely feedback and reviews from press, as well as some big name YouTubers and Twitch streamers playing the game.
The vibes in here are immaculate right now.
Sweet. It really motivated me to double down on this thick, atmospheric vibe the game is known for, and bring that forward into my next project, Hollowbody. So, what is Hollowbody? How did it come about? Well, I'd like to touch on my process a little bit here. I came out of Chasing Static really motivated by the reception from the horror game community, and took a couple of months to go back and replay some of my favourite horror games, and turns out most of them are survival horror. Now, if you're not familiar, survival horror is a bit of an old term, coined by Shinji Mikami, back when marketing the original Resident Evil for PlayStation. This was back in a time when less people were familiar with games, and genres was a really important part of marketing your game. There were less chances for people to see games. You'd mostly just see them when they launched, sat on a shelf in your local game store or in small adverts in gaming magazines. Both of these spaces are very limited in the amount of information you can convey to a potential customer, so it was important to have a simple shorthand like a genre name to help people understand the concepts. If we look at today's gaming landscape, genre is less important. Often the games that are celebrated within the indie sphere are those that break genre conventions. You just need to look at Steam's tagging system to know how convoluted these tags have become. We now have survival games and horror games. And then we have horror games that have survival mechanics, or survival games that have elements of horror. None of these explain survival horror. Survival horror, in the traditional sense of the term, is very specific in what it entails. These games are generally third-person games, but not exclusively, that have a strong narrative pushing the story forward whilst introducing stripped-back and simplified combat mechanics, along with item management and a heavy reliance on puzzle solving. So you already see a bit of the influence this genre has had on Chasing Static, which featured a strong narrative with a heavy reliance on puzzle solving, but it was missing the combat and item management element. So from my point of view, the step up from Chasing Static to making a survival horror game seemed achievable. I'd have to learn some things about creating a combat system, but otherwise it was mostly design challenges I'd already faced in my previous game. So I started out by tackling the thing I knew would be the most challenging, the combat. I tried out some pre-existing assets for third-person character controllers, but they were all incredibly complex with a ton of features I really had no use for. Like I mentioned before, these games rely on a strong but simple set of base mechanics. I didn't need manual aiming, just a lock-on system for aiming, similar to Silent Hill and Resident Evil. I also didn't need many of the features normally present in these systems, such as crouching, jumping, climbing, that sort of thing. Stuff like climbing, for example, is just handled in a cutscene, like you'll interact with something you could potentially climb and she'll climb. There's no need for like raycasting and complex climbing mechanics. So I figured I'd tackle it myself. I first tried coding a system in C#, and whilst that is a great option for some people, I find that personally a more visual approach to programming works better for me. So I quickly switched over to Playmaker. If you're not aware, Playmaker is a plugin for Unity that lets you script things using these state machines, which are sort of like flowcharts for code. I'll just bring some up here. You'll have to excuse my messy structuring here. This is still all sort of work in progress. A lot of things could probably be done more efficiently, and I plan to clean things up a bit at some point. But I'm an artist first and foremost, and coding is sort of a side hustle to get games shipped. So if it works for me, it works. That's fine. So with Playmaker, you can really neatly split things up into individual FSMs. So I have one here that handles movement and aiming / locking on and stuff over to the right. And then here I have another one that simply checks if you're running. And then another one for the flashlight, another for the player's damage system, animation system, etc, etc. Now if I run the game quickly, I'll show you how these systems play together. See, the window down the bottom here shows a visual representation of the flow of these systems. This is something you don't get when writing code in the traditional sense. It's really good for troubleshooting and visualizing where issues might be cropping up in your systems. Like, you can just see how the code is flowing, and then it'll flag up errors if there's any errors at any point, or you can also like check the variables in runtime. So super good. So you can see how when I aim, this state is activated, and then it's deactivated when I stop aiming. And all this is handled with events, so you can tell an FSM, or finite state machine, to send an event to another FSM, and then they can talk to one another. You'll notice a huge portion of my systems are tied to the player character here. That's primarily because the character is going to be present in every scene, so anything to do with the player input or gameplay is built on this character, and I store a reference to them as a global variable. So whenever I want, I can just reference the player variable, and it knows that this is the guy to talk to, send events to, and that sort of thing. So the same goes for the enemy here. The enemy has less to do, so it's a lot less complicated than the player. But you can see how we have event listeners here. So for example, if the player attacks the enemy, it will send an event to trigger animations and damage, etc. Now, the other paid asset I use for my games, other than Playmaker, is the brilliant Adventure Creator. It's a very well-known asset within the adventure game community, with possibly the best developer across all of Unity's assets when it comes to customer support and like dedication to their asset. This guy Chris has not only made and consistently updated a fantastic robust backend for adventure games, but he also replies to literally every post on the forum asking for help. He'll often go out of his way to write new features or small code snippets just at the request of users. So amazing asset and an amazing developer. Anyway, you might be thinking, why does he need Adventure Creator if he's making everything in Playmaker? Well, if we recap a bit, I mentioned about how survival horror games have a reliance on puzzle and narratives, two things that Adventure Creator excels at. I use Adventure Creator to handle all of my item management. It has a great inventory system, as well as a lot of my menus and triggers and cutscenes and all of the dialogue in the game. You soon learn when working on a narrative game that keeping track of the dialogue and having a system in place to handle this is essential. It really is. All this dialogue really mounts up, and when it comes to ship the game, you'll need to at least export all of the text in a correctly formatted CSV file for translators, but most games you'll also need to add voice acting. With tens of thousands of lines of dialogue, you don't want to be doing any of this stuff manually. Thankfully, Adventure Creator lets you easily scan all of your text. It will number it based on characters for easily adding voice lines. So it's literally, you can just drag and drop your numbered voice lines and it automatically links them to the appropriate character's speech line. And it also allows you to export the text for translations, which is all formatted to sort of an industry standard for translators. Perfect. So yeah, Adventure Creator is brilliant. Fantastic if you're making a narrative game. Playmaker is really, really fun. It has allowed me to do so much stuff that I just couldn't comprehend doing in C#. I'm sure if I dedicated the time to learning C#, I could get my head around a lot of these concepts, but the visual coding method of Playmaker is just perfect for me. Like, as an artist who also enjoys making games and writing stories, I don't want to get bogged down with learning like really technical C# stuff. Like, I have enough stuff on my plate already, and Playmaker just makes it that much easier to sort of jump in and try out new features. Like building a combat system, like attacking, melee weapons, ranged weapons, enemies with health, and you know, like death states and all this stuff. Like, I couldn't have ever sort of imagined doing that until I got stuck into Playmaker and realised actually it's really easy to break it down into the smaller systems and sort of build them bit by bit until you have your full system. So yeah, both amazing assets and both essential in helping me build Hollowbody. And yeah, I guess that wraps it up for my first devlog for Hollowbody. I hope that was helpful. I've had a lot of questions from players of Chasing Static about where to start and the sort of assets I use to help with development, so hopefully this clears things up a little bit. I'm hoping to put out these fairly regularly. I'm trying to expand my audience a bit beyond Twitter, where most of my followers are, seeing as that place is a hell site at the moment and it's pretty depressing, to be honest. It'll be fine, but it's also depressing. So yeah, if you liked the video, please lightly press that tender subscribe button below and give the video a like as well. That'd be really cool. And if there's anything you'd like me to cover in my next video, just drop a comment below and I'll see if I can include it. And thanks, yeah, and don't forget to wishlist Hollowbody on Steam if that's something you'd like to play. Cheers then! Bye.